The most important part of making a Five Nights at Freddy's timeline is obviously understanding where every part of this weird puzzle fits in. While a lot of people worry about the placement of cryptic 8-bit minigames or obscure 7-year-old mysteries that, to be honest, will probably stay unsolved forever, I'm here to do something a bit different. Today, I present to you the ultimate FNAF timeline of every single Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. We'll be going over everything, from FNAF 1 to the latest official game Into the Pits pizzerias, and tons of evidence about the games many other theorists and fans have missed, that come packaged in with these pizza joints lore. So strap in, and let's get right into it. Actually, before we get into that, let me explain how I'm going to structure this video. I'm going to go over every relevant FNAF game by release order that has a pizzeria or restaurant joint in it, go over the timeline placement of said game, and then explain the lore of each pizzeria, its animatronics, and more. I won't go over the spiritual or minigame pizzerias like the Happiest Day or any of the others, but I'll connect all of these pizza restaurants into one neat timeline so you can become a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza expert. And hey, if you end up enjoying this video, please like, subscribe, but most importantly, comment your opinion on this theory, because that's what this video is. Just a theory. Also, yeah, if this video somehow gets 500 likes, I'll make a video of myself making a real-life Freddy Fazbear pizza using the official recipe from Scott, so yeah, go do that. Anyway, enough begging. Enjoy the show. The first game in the FNAF franchise is, obviously, Five Nights at Freddy's, which introduced us to two of the first Freddy's pizzerias we got to see. This Freddy Fazbear's Pizza is pretty worn down, covered in cobwebs and in a general state of disarray in some parts, but it's still open to the general public, and seems to be making a comeback in the public eye as we learned in the week before, the new FNAF 1 interactive novel. In this novel, which is about Ralph, or Phone Guy, working his last shift at Freddy's before his death, we find out Ralph's been working at the company for around 11 or 12 years as of FNAF 1. Using what we know about Ralph and the fact that he doesn't know what some of the older Freddy's pizza joints are all that well, we can deduce Ralph joined the company around 1986, right after the MCI, and probably right before Circus Babies. 1986 plus 12 years is 1998. There's other evidence throughout the book, such as specific references and more, that help prove this. If you want a more detailed explanation of FNAF 1's timeline placement, as well as some overarching FNAF lore, I suggest you watch this video I made last week if you haven't already, just so I don't repeat myself too much in this one. Anyway, we got our first pizzeria to add to the timeline, a battered Freddy's in the late 90s, doing its best to have a glorious comeback for the public after the tragedy that happened there. But that's not all. As I brought up earlier, FNAF 1 introduces us to a second pizzeria. Through the newspaper clippings we can sometimes see in the East Hall corner, we find out that this pizzeria came after a previous one, also from the 90s, which failed because no one wanted to go there because of what had happened at a previous Freddy's establishment. We can be pretty certain this is a separate pizzeria because that one closed, and we know the FNAF 1 one is open, as well as the fact that most people seem to have forgotten about the Freddy's murders by the time of the week before. So, the next game is actually not only much clearer about its timeline placement in FNAF 1, but also introduces us to two more locations, so let's break down the next entry in the FNAF franchise, FNAF 2. Five Nights at Freddy's 2, the sequel prequel to FNAF 1, actually has some interesting lore it's 1987. It's on the paycheck, it's just 1987, it's all there is to it, I don't need to keep you here for retention. There's a debate over whether this game takes place in the summer or fall, since Phone Guy talks about a summer job but the paycheck mentions November, but that's not really relevant and was likely a slight oversight on Scott's part back when making the game, so we won't talk about that. Anyway, we've already got two games into this timeline, with FNAF 1 apparently happening 11 years after FNAF 2, which features its own new pizzeria, the new and improved Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, which I'll refer to as Grand Reopening Freddy's from now on. Through the newspaper at the start of the game, we learned that Grand Reopening Freddy's opened in 1987 as a response to the failure of the previous location, which we'll get to due to the missing children incident. This new location featured brand new toy animatronics with built-in security systems meant to keep criminals at bay. I wonder why this measure was taken. This location also contains the broken down versions of the classic Freddy's animatronics, but don't be mistaken. As I'm sure everyone already knows, because let's be honest, it's been like 10 years, these are not the animatronics after FNAF 1, since, as we just covered, FNAF 2 is a prequel. Essentially, the theory goes that these withered animatronics are broken down versions of the original band from the 1985 location. However, I don't think this is the case. In FNAF 2, Phone Guy says that Fazbear Entertainment Techs attempted to retrofit these characters with new parts and design features, but gave up halfway through, as it was too difficult and the animatronics spelled bad for some reason. Could this be why these animatronics look so strange compared to the ones from FNAF 1? Because strange parts were added and removed from them, only for all the changes to be restored by the time of FNAF 1? Maybe. I find this theory pretty convincing, and I like it much more than the unwithered theory, which says that the fixed withereds are just what the characters looked like back in the day. Anyway, that's Grand Reopening Freddy's out of the way, but Five Nights at Freddy's 2 introduces us to one more obscure location that no one knew anything about back then, the elusive Fredbear's Family Diner. On night 5 of FNAF 2, Phone Guy talks about how Fazbear Entertainment is trying to locate the original founder of the original Freddy's location.
We don't have a replacement for your shift yet, but we're working on it. We're going to try to contact the original restaurant owner. I think the name of the place was Fredbear's Family Diner or something like that.
Phone Guy isn't too sure what Fredbear's is, which implies that pizzeria and what happened there was kept under wraps, so employees and clients didn't know the truth. We'll talk more about Fredbear's when we get to FNAF 4, but for now, let's move on to Five Nights at Freddy's 3. FNAF 3 was the first game in the franchise that didn't take place in a pizzeria. Instead, Fazbear's Fright, the location the player finds themselves in, is a haunted house-esque attraction created by some random people 30 years after the horrific events at Freddy's happened, whichever of the many horrific events they're talking about. Anyway, Fright isn't a pizzeria, but the game does show us one abstract real-world pizzeria, namely the one William Afton dies in. This pizzeria is actually almost definitely the same 1998 pizzeria from FNAF 1, just in an even bigger state of decay, so FNAF 3 doesn't really have much for us to cover. I'll still put Fazbear's Fright in the timeline, however. As for the year this takes place, it's either 2015, 30 years after the MCI, or 2028, 30 years after FNAF 1 and the closure of Freddy's. Personally, I prefer the latter option. Next up is FNAF 4, an interesting addition purely because it gave us the closest look we'd ever gotten at a FNAF pizzeria so far through the 8-bit minigames rendition of Fredbear's Family Diner. Fredbear's is a relatively small establishment with a few party rooms, a backstage, a few employees-only rooms, and a show stage, where Fredbear and Spring Bonnie, who obviously go on to become Golden Freddy and Springtrap, perform for kids. In FNAF 4, we see that Fredbear's is pretty popular with children, and that our player character Dave, Michael, Miller, Schmidt, Evan, Chris, Norman, Crying Child Afton is terrified of the animatronics performing on stage. We all know how that ends up for him, but where does this pizzeria go into the timeline we're building so far? Well, just like FNAF 2, FNAF 4 is pretty clear about its timeline placement year-wise. We know from those calls back in FNAF 2 that Fredbear's was the original Freddy's Pizzeria, and the TV in Crying Child's house that plays the Fredbear and Friends show tells us the copyright date is 1983, and the week before also confirms the events of the minigames happened in 83. Next up, we've got Sister Location, an arguably far more interesting game pizzeria-wise than the last two. Sister Location introduced us to two completely different Freddy Fazbears from any we'd seen before. They weren't even really Freddy Fazbears. Throughout the game, we work at Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rentals, an underground bunker designed to house the funtime wave of Fazbear animatronics that was opened after the failure and closure of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza after the tragedy that struck it. At least, that's what the higher-ups want you to think. Turns out, while he was still alive, William Afton, the man behind said tragedy, designed these robots to snatch and kidnap kids, likely so he could use them for his agony and remnant experiments. However, Circus Baby's Rentals isn't the only establishment we learn about in this game. Through Baby and her 8-bit minigame, which took me like an hour and a half to beat, we also find out about Circus Baby's Pizza World, the rental facility's predecessor, that allegedly closed due to gas leaks. I'm sure we all know why that establishment really closed. The timeline placement of these two restaurants, or rather sister locations, is definitely the weirdest thus far. We know the rental facility opens at some point after the missing children incident, with Pizza World probably being right before or right after it, but we don't have any definitive dates. Only a few more pizzerias to go, so let's jump straight into our next FNAF game, Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator. Technically speaking, this game has infinite pizzerias since it's all about building your own establishment and giving it unique attractions, cast of characters, and widely known arcade game secrets with no clear answer that have been making everyone go insane over them for the past 7 years. But FNAF 6 is all about one pizzeria, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place, a revival of the Freddy Fazbear brand by Henry Emily, years after the last recorded Freddy's back in 1998, since Fazbear's Fright isn't owned by Fazbear Entertainment. This pizzeria is extremely suspicious, and we have good reason to assume it's a remodeled version of a pre-existing location. I think it's very likely this building is actually the refurbished Fredbear's Family Diner location. In Sister Location, in the infamous Breaker Room map, we see that Fredbear's is connected to the underground bunker. Henry has access to William's blueprints, as we see in the Insanity ending, and Funtime Chica, the clowns, the security puppet, and more are present in the FNAF 6 location, with all of them being connected to Sister Location and the Funtimes in some way, whether it be by their name, their design, or their appearance in Sister Location related material, respectively. The outside of the restaurant also looks extremely similar to the one from the security puppet minigame where William Afton kills Charlotte Emily, which we know happens either at Fredbear's or Freddy's, and since I think it's Fredbear's, that's some more evidence to add to that idea. As for the timeline of this thing, it's definitely after FNAF 3, which is either 2015 or 2028 as we discussed earlier, so it's either something like 2017 or 2023 if the Insanity ending monitors anything to go off of, or 2029 to 2030. However, after the pizza place burns, there aren't many Freddy Fazbear locations for a long time. At least, until one very special 3-story tall mega shopping/entertainment complex opens its doors many years after the disasters at Freddy's. the Freddy Fazbear Mega Pizzaplex. In Security Breach, we play inside the Mega Pizzaplex, getting to know its cast of glamrock animatronics, as well as finding out that this location is built on top of the charred ruins of the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place from FNAF 6. There's not really a lot to the timeline placement of this. It doesn't really matter all that much since it's the last location in the timeline, so I'm confident with putting this around 2030 or 2045. And now, the one pizzeria that isn't explicitly seen in any of the mainline games so far. Only one, the latest one, in fact, Into the Pit, shows us what this old pizzeria was like. This is the 1985 Freddy Fazbear that was left to rot after the MCI, and was likely never used for another establishment again, since this particular building layout is unique to Into the Pit's pizzeria. It has a show stage on the far right, on the opposite side of the building to the entrance, at least 4 party rooms, a large arcade, kitchen, security room, and more. On the left hand side of the pizzeria, we see the employees only room where William Afton gathered and killed the MCI kids, and it looks like this room is actually an employee break room that Afton disguised as a party room. Timeline wise, it's likely this was the first Freddy's opened from 1983, which is when Fazbear Entertainment was founded, to 1985, right after the MCI. Now that we've finally gone through the list of all the pizzerias, it's time for the grand finale, the ultimate timeline of Freddy Fazbear's pizzerias. First up is, of course, Fredbear's Family Diner, opened around the 70s as we know thanks to the Silver Eyes, and closed in 1983 right after the Bite. After or during the lifespan of that diner came OG Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, where the MCI took place in 1985. After that incident, Fazbear Entertainment closed off the location and packed its bags to a newer, cleaner location. Grand Reopening Freddy's, opened in 1987. That one also failed due to the combination of another set of child murders and another animatronic Bite nicknamed the Bite of 87. Also shortly after, or before the MCI, in 1985, William Afton created Circus Baby's Pizza World, a contender to Fazbear that was a front for kidnapping kids using the fun times. But after the animatronics he designed did their jobs too well, he closed that pizzeria and opted for a rental facility deep underground called Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rentals, likely opened around 1986. After the failure of Grand Reopening, it's likely Freddy's reopened on a very low budget, as we see in the FNAF 2 newspaper clippings from the ending and the week before. But as we know from FNAF 1's newspaper clippings, that particular low budget Freddy's didn't last long. However, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, the old and not improved establishment we see in FNAF 1, did a little bit better than its predecessor, although Ralph ended up sort of messing up the animatronics during the week before. This latest Freddy's is the one we see in FNAF 1, which takes place in 1998. A long time passes between FNAF 1 Freddy's and the next Fazbear location, Fazbear's Fright, around 2028, whether that's part of the official Fazbear franchise or not. After that comes Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place around 2030, which burns down and leads to the grand return of Freddy's as the Freddy Fazbear Mega Pizzaplex. And that is the ultimate FNAF timeline of Freddy Fazbear's Pizzerias. Thanks for watching. This timeline is quick and pretty fun to make, so I hope you enjoyed. If you want to see more videos like this, or just FNAF theories in general, be sure to like and subscribe, or if you've already done that, turn on notifications so you know when a new video comes out. Most importantly, however, comment your thoughts on this theory down below. I read every comment and reply to most, so don't be shy. And with that, friends, remember, keep on theorizing and never stop overthinking. This has been WitheredCircle, the Midnight Theorist.